Hello and welcome to Florida Politics Now. We are a couple of weeks post legislative session, so I am joined by Jacob Murphy at WCTV, Robert Bradfield at WCJB, and Allison Baker at WJHG. And so now the governor is going around the state signing bills into law. So far, he's only signed four, including this year's Farm Bill.
This year's Farm Bill offers several protections to farms and consumers, including making sure farmland's protected from development.
We have not wanted to see the state of Florida just turn into a big concrete jungle.
The Farm Bill, which Governor Ron DeSantis signed into law Monday, does several things to prevent that from happening. This includes banning high-density development on lands designated as rural, conservation, or green space in a local comprehensive plan.
I think it shows that we have a strong commitment to not just agriculture, but our rural communities writ large.
The Farm Bill also allows the state to decide if land bought since 2024 can be put back into ag production. Ag Commissioner Wilton Simpson says this could particularly help young farmers.
If you are a young farmer saying, how can we afford to buy land in this state? Watch for this program. This land is much more affordable than obviously land that's going to be closer to your normal cities.
The Farmers Feeding Florida program is now permanent under the new law. It directs fresh, Florida-grown food to food banks to help those in need, something Senate President Ben Albritton is passionate about.
To the extent that we can do something about it, we can make sure that we can fight against that idea of a child going to bed hungry. Nothing can be more important than that.
The new law also prevents local governments from banning gas-powered lawn equipment, strengthens penalties against neighborhood solicitations in some cases, and cracks down on cheating on CDL English tests. These changes take effect July 1st. In Tallahassee, I'm Cody Butler reporting.
And so there's definitely a lot in this year's Farm Bill from farmers and consumer protections, and this bill will take effect on July 1st.
And Cody, I'm assuming farmers across the state always are very interested to see what gets in the Farm Bill and what doesn't. Any sense on how they're feeling with some of the rules and the regulations passed this year?
Everyone I have heard from has supported this. There's some money from citrus that the legislature approved as well, which is a surprise with Senator Albritton being coming from the citrus industry himself. So pretty much across the board, farmers are in favor of this. Some of the consumer protection aspects of it were a little controversial through the legislative process. They did take out the big concern that farmers had this year. So pretty much everyone in the ag industry, at least, seems pretty happy with this one.
And Cody, we actually did a story recently with some cattle farmers here, dairy farmers, and they're having to downsize just because of the expensive farming. So do you think this Farm Bill is really going to help some of those smaller farms that are struggling?
There could be some potential help when it comes to that. There's also some federal help coming in from the big, beautiful bill. They're calling it a rural renaissance on the federal level. Rural renaissance didn't quite make it through, at least policy-wise, this year in the legislature. So the state still hasn't finalized the budget, so there could potentially be more money for farmers, but I know farmers across the state are definitely struggling, especially as the drought worsens in many parts of the state as well.
Yeah, we're speaking even with a watermelon farmer here today for a story regarding drought. But Cody, talking about this bill again, it seems pretty wide sweeping, at least what it can and cannot do. Has this obviously been in the works for a while? And also, why now? Why this final year? Was this something that the governor wanted to push over the finish line before he leaves office? But were they not able to tackle this last year?
This is kind of an annual thing. It regulates the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, so it falls under Commissioner Wilton Simpson. He had a hand in a lot of this. There was one last year as well. And so it's kind of turned into a yearly bill. But like some of the things that he wanted was protecting first responders from signal jammers. So they kind of toughen the penalties. They were finding that some of these crime rings were jamming first responder signals, radio signals, so that they couldn't communicate as effectively. So this makes it a state crime as well. There's some vet assistance, contractors. So like everything related to agriculture and consumer services, which falls under the Commissioner of Agriculture here in the state of Florida, was included in this bill.
And Cody, I was curious about one part of your package about the land buyback program, and it sounded like the ag commissioner kind of gave you a wait and see how this plays out. But the idea that farming, at least from an outsider's perspective, it feels generational. Today's farmers are just the sons and daughters of yesterday's farmers. But is the idea that someone could grow up and decide they want to become a farmer, having no land, having no prior history, and maybe through this program can buy land affordably? Because it does seem far-fetched that you could be able to buy a good number of acres for a reasonable price if you're just starting out.
Yeah, and well, it's more to protect those family farmers that are coming up through, because a lot of farming has become commercialized. So a lot of companies will buy big swaths of land and farm that instead of it being the mom and pop farmers like it used to be. And so this is to kind of help get some of the lands that might be a little further out, that might be state owned as part some of this as well. So it's a way to protect kind of some of the rural Florida and make land more land available as more people are moving to the state. So they're going to need more housing and everything else like that. So, and a lot of people move to the urban areas. So this is just a way to kind of prevent some of the urban sprawl in some parts of the state. And so the idea is really to kind of keep old Florida intact as we continue to grow here in the state. Hello, welcome back to Florida Politics Now. We had a couple special elections for legislative seats that were trickled down from DeSantis and Trump appointments throughout the year. And so we had a couple special elections, and Democrats actually flipped a couple seats, one in the House of Representatives. That's actually is where Donald Trump lives here in the state of Florida. So now he will be represented by a Democrat in the Florida House of Representatives, and Lieutenant Governor Jay Collins' former seat is now held by a Democrat. And so let's just take a look at the momentum that Democrats are seeing going into this year's midterm election.
Democrats are heading into the 2026 midterms with a swagger they haven't had in a while. A few special election results have them talking about momentum, and Republicans quietly admitting this may be more grind than red wave.
I think the midterms nationally, there's obviously headwinds. You got to figure out ways to overcome it as Republicans.
Governor Ron DeSantis speaking during a fireside chat at Palm Beach Atlantic University Wednesday night. In his message to Republicans in Washington, do something voters can actually see.
If I were advising people in Congress, I would say, well, one way you can maybe change the narrative is actually get off your rear ends and do something for a change, because they're not doing very much.
Florida Democrats are still outnumbered by more than 1 million registered voters, but they're pointing to this week's special elections where they flipped 2 legislative seats as proof the gap isn't the whole story.
We are showing the world that Florida Democrats are ready to compete everywhere. And if we can win in Donald Trump's backyard, we can win anywhere.
Florida Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried says it shows voters are growing tired of Republican policies.
Today, Floridians everywhere are feeling the strain of rising prices, fueled by Trump's chaos and years of corruption from Washington to Tallahassee.
And there are national crosswinds too. A new AP NORC poll suggests that the president could face blowback from his own voters if the U.S. gets drawn into a prolonged war in the Middle East.
This has been an infusion of energy into Florida Democrats that they've really needed. It's going to help them raise a lot of money because they lag behind the Republicans.
Political analyst Susan McManus says the campaigns will argue about registration, money, and enthusiasm, but she says the only metric that decides elections is simple.
Absolutely. Turnout is everything. You can't just take registration. You can't just take party. You can't just take a standard kind of approach to getting out the vote. Those things don't work anymore.
Still, the midterms are 7 months away.
A lot can change between now and then,
including the lines on the map. Lawmakers return to Tallahassee next month for a special session on congressional redistricting. In Tallahassee, I'm Cody Butler reporting.
And again, they are going to be in special session on redistricting. That doesn't mean they have to do anything. They just have to show up. And they are getting some pressure from some members of Congress to not change the maps because they're getting worried that the maps are changed, especially down south in Miami, that they could actually end up losing seats, partly because of the momentum we're seeing in these special elections.
Cody, I'll start. The governor kind of really downplayed a little bit, if you want to call it that. I'm sure whatever party's in charge, may have a different opinion maybe than the other party that flipped the seat. But what are you hearing maybe from your inner circle? And then I have a follow-up regarding a comment from Senator Scott. But what are you hearing maybe in terms of the GOP? Are they nervous? Are they sweating? Or are they just brushing this off, saying this really is a special election? Of course, turnout's going to be lower.
Mm-hmm. And some members of the Republican Party are downplaying this. The chair, Evan Powers, said that special elections are just that, special. And we've seen Democrats make gains in special elections, then turn around and lose in the general. So it's still too early to tell. But there is, again, the growing concern, at least some concern, that Democrats are realizing that, or Republicans are realizing that Democrats might have an edge in some races in the state this year.
And then just to follow up, Senator Scott was quoted here saying in Politico, it's a special election. It's always hard to get the vote out. Any elections in Florida right now would be state issues. But you mentioned, of course, the war in Iran. That's not just obviously a state issue, but a global issue. Rising gas prices really hitting everybody's wallet. So when does the state issue also then become a national issue? And is that obviously something that voters consider, and they do, the economy when they head to the polls as well? But I just thought that comment was striking when he said elections in Florida right now would be state issues.
And right now, well, the two candidates that won, the two Democrats that won this week, they ran on the affordability issue that Democrats have been pushing in the state legislature, and really honing in on that. Republicans at the beginning of session said they wanted to tackle affordability but in the end they didn't. If Democrats keep honing in, especially key races, they could definitely see the momentum there. And those are the issues that everyone's talking about, whether you're talking about it on the national level. We've heard Donald Trump talk about affordability, and he's trying to figure out what to do with gas prices with the war going on in Iran. And so these are issues that transcend no matter what level of government. These are the issues that people are voting on.
And Cody, do you get the sense, 7 months is a long time. A lot could happen with the war in Iran, with gas prices, and a lot will be happening. But do you get the sense the president, some of his endorsed candidates did not end up winning this past week in those special elections? He's endorsed Byron Donalds for the governor's race. A long way to go with that. But do you get the sense that the power of that approval from the White House might be weakening here in Florida, or do you get the sense that the tides could still change?
The Trump endorsement historically has always been a kind of a double-edged sword, if you will. It's half of them win, half of them lose. So a lot of people here in the state, at least politically, still take a lot of stock in the Trump endorsement. Trump endorsed both Republicans that lost this week, but they are also looking at the governor's endorsement. And the governor didn't endorse anyone in races this week that were this week. And so there is still that divide here in Florida between the DeSantis camp and the Trump camp. So it'll be just one of those wait and see, because at the end of the day, the only poll that matters is the one that's counted in November.
And you also touched a little on voter turnout. And like Jacob just said, we're 7 months out. November's a long way away. So how can both parties get their voters to go to the polls? Because I know we've seen it struggle here in Florida with people actually showing up for some of the smaller elections.
Well, one thing that's not really talked about on voter turnout is the no party voters that are going out and voting. That number is growing also in the state. So Democrats really turn to them and get their message to those voters. Republicans have been struggling with that in some of these races. And so it really depends on who will be able to get their messaging out to the no party affiliates in the state. And so we'll wait and see. And this is a midterm, so that doesn't have the same turnout as what we had in the presidential election a couple of years ago. So everyone's going to be pushing, trying to get those in. We also have election law changes as well. So that could affect some of that as well. So, it's going to be one of those wait and sees to see exactly how many people will turn out and vote, how many people will get their messaging out to these no party voters, and the new laws that were just passed, and see how those take effect as well.
You mentioned too the special session for next month. Is there any movement on that committee that you reported on last year regarding those districts? You mentioned too the lawmakers really just need to show up whether they do anything or not. But any movement on that committee that was named late last year? Where do things stand with them? And do we really even know if there's going to be a special session with even a vote and a changing of maps?
Yeah, the House Congressional District or Congressional Redistricting Committee only met twice. They stopped meeting once the governor called the special session because they were going to do their work during the regular session. And the court case that the governor cited for having the special session in April, a decision still has not been made on that. It was a case in Louisiana. So they are in a holding pattern, at least publicly right now, as to what's going to happen with that. But we've also seen the legislature show up and 15 minutes later adjourn the special session that the governor decides that he wants. So we'll wait and see if anything actually happens. They're really, for the most part, really waiting for that Supreme Court decision on the case of Louisiana to see if they're going to have to adjust some of their districts, particularly down in South Florida.
And Cody, I know you're not in the predictions business, but do you think the maps we have right now are going to be the maps in November?
At least in North Florida, I don't expect much changes up there. You can never predict what the legislature is going to do. So they'll say they're going to do one thing and then turn around a couple hours later and do the opposite. So we'll just have to wait and see what the legislature will end up doing at the end of April.
Excellent diplomatic answer.
You can tell I talk to a lot of politicians. All right, that's all the time we have for this edition of Florida Politics Now. We'll be back here again next week. See you then.